Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. My Bible is open to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. I need you to meet me there. Be ready to read along with me as we add another layer to our exploration of what is the Lord's Supper. We observe it as Christians every first day of the week. We are teaching our children and our grandchildren using unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. We've talked a lot about the background of that. Last Wednesday, we talked about this is a memorial that we participate in together. I really want to emphasize the we, because it's not uncommon when talking about the Lord's Supper or hearing someone else talk about it, to hear it described as communion. But what do we mean by that word, communion? All the word itself means is to share in common or to participate in the same thing. And that is exactly what the Apostle Paul has in mind in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, as he provides instructions that he had received from the Lord. Can you start reading with me in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 17, where Paul writes, "But in the following instructions, I do not commend you, because when you," notice this, "come together, it is not for the better or for the worse." These saints in Corinth were coming together, but there was some sort of a problem. For in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you. That's the very opposite of communion, right? And Paul says, I believe it in part, for there must be factions among you in order that those who are genuine among you may be recognized. We'll talk a little bit about that division as a class. For now, notice again, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper that you eat. There was a problem. For in eating, each one goes ahead with his own meal. One goes hungry, another gets drunk. That doesn't sound like communion, does it? And so Paul says, what? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? Or do you despise the church of God and humiliate those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I commend you in this? No, I will not. There were things that needed to change in Corinth, and so he reminds them, as we've studied in previous lessons, in the next few verses, what he himself had received from the Lord, what this communion was to be all about. Look down at verse 33. Where he says, "So then, my brothers, when you," here it is again, "when you come together to eat, wait for one another. If anyone is hungry, let him eat at home." That's not what this communion is to be all about. So that when you come together, it will not be for judgment. This is all about coming together, participating together, sharing together. That's the very nature of communion. You might have to turn a page. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians 12, verses 12 and 13, where the Apostle Paul emphasizes, we've heard this analogy before, right? Where he says in verse 12, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ." You have many members of your body, right? You have fingers, you have toes, you have a head, you have arms, you have legs. so it is with the body of Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. What is communion? Communion is participating as one, sharing as one. That is who we are to be as the body of Christ. So we'll explore this as a class. One of the big aspects of the good news is that whether you were male or female, slave or free, rich or poor, you were all welcome at the table of the Lord. In fact, we might dig a little into this specific example. We've studied it in other contexts. Paul's little letter to Philemon. Philemon was a master. He had a slave named Onesimus who had run away. And while he was away, Paul had taught him the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, and then send him back to his master, Philemon, who was a Christian. And he carried this letter from the Apostle Paul back to his master. I want you to listen to this language as we close. Philemon, verses 15 and 16. Paul says, "For this perhaps is why he, Onesimus, your runaway slave, was parted from you for a while, that you might have him back forever. No longer as a bondservant, but as a beloved brother, especially to me, but how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord." Can you imagine the first time that Philemon, the master, observed communion with his once runaway slave, Onesimus? Not as master and slave, but as beloved brothers in the one body, the body of Christ. What has the power to draw people together to share in such a powerful experience? It is the Lord's Supper. Lots of ways to answer what it is. One is communion, to share in common, to participate in the same thing. We've got a lot to talk about. I so appreciate you being in class tonight. Hope I've set you up for good discussion and that you have a great rest of this week.